everyone. I'm Linda Nickell, and welcome to the Happiness Hour. Every Wednesday, photographers meet here to connect, inspire, and create. Our guest speakers share their images, tips and techniques, and a little bit of inspiration to help you improve your own photography skills. The schedule for our upcoming presentations is on my website at lindanickell.com, as well as the links to previous sessions on YouTube. Tonight's guest is Jennifer Leigh Warner. Jennifer is a conservation and wildlife photographer based in Central Texas. By sharing her images of beautiful animals in their natural environment, Jennifer hopes to inspire others to preserve the world that we share with all living creatures. As the chair of the Ethics Committee for the North America Nature Photographers Association, also known as NANPA, Jennifer works to promote the ethical practice of photographing wildlife. In her presentation, Beyond the Selfie, Jennifer will talk about guidelines and best practices for ethical nature and wildlife photography. She will share real-life examples and her own stories and images from the field. If you're on Instagram, please look for her at Experience Wildlife, and please visit her website at experiencewildlife.com. Welcome to the Happiness Hour, Jennifer.
Great. Thank you so much for having me. And I am just so excited to meet all these new people and share this presentation with you. So I'm going to share my screen here.
Hang on. So, okay. I know, right? See, you don't know the rules here. So,
I already broke the rules.
So first of all, I skimmed your bio because when I looked at it, there was a lot to tell. So if I missed anything, if you're not going to include it in your presentation, take a minute and tell the fine people in the room a little bit about yourself that you didn't put it in your bio or it's not on your website. I'll just ask, how did you get roped into being the chair of the ethics committee for NANPA?
Yeah. So that's a really good question. And I am going to talk about it a little bit in the presentation, but I started experiencing some unpleasant situations while I was out in the field. I started my photography journey, like many others, just really passionate about photographing wildlife and beautiful landscapes. And I would encounter people who were behaving in a manner that I felt was unsafe for both them and wildlife. And after some unpleasant situations, I started realizing that documenting those behaviors and using those images that I documented to show what not to do, how we can be better. And that sparked the interest of the current ethics committee chair pretty quickly. When I showed her, I was at a workshop. She was an instructor, I was a student, and I showed her the project I was working on, and she immediately asked if I'd join her committee. And about a year after, I started working as a project manager for an ethics handbook that 5 years later, we're almost done with it. It's still in the works, but it should come out this year. And after I agreed to be the project manager of this very large book, the current ethics committee chair said she wanted to step down and asked if I would take over. So I did, and I've been roped in ever since. And that was about 2018.
Good. I like to use the word roped because anybody that's on any position, volunteer or paid committee, you get roped. You walk in and they're like, hey, fresh ideas, just another body. So good for them. All right, I know you're going to get to some good stuff, so I'll just let you go. But that was just one of those selfish questions. I'm curious of how you got involved with them. And I knew that you were going to cover some of that, but I thought I will just ask before I forget. So, all right, let's go and get started.
Excellent. Yes. So, and that was a great question. And thank you for asking. So, so I'll start sharing my screen. And Like Linda said, if you have any questions throughout, pop them in the chat. If it's urgent, I can answer during the presentation, but I'll definitely leave time at the end to answer questions, because I know sometimes they just, you don't pop into your brain until it's all over. Like Linda said, the presentation is called Beyond the Selfie, Ethics in Wildlife Photography. And as she said, I'm Jennifer Leigh Warner, the NANPA Ethics Committee Chair, and I'm also the founder of a company called Experience Wildlife. Going to give you a little bit of an overview before I even get any started, so you have kind of an expectation of what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk a little bit about environmental knowledge, knowledge of subject in place, understanding what rules and laws are out there regarding being out in nature and interacting with wildlife, individuals, so experience, expertise and responsibilities as a person being out interacting with wildlife, and then always the how close is too close. And that seems to be the number one thing I encounter, is people getting too close and not really knowing what that looks like. And then just a little bit of a topic about photographing captive wildlife as well. So that's a little bit of an overview. But before we dive into anything, I do want to give a little background about who I am. Like Linda said, what isn't in my bio. So, we talked about I'm a founder of Experience Wildlife, but what is that? In my company, I started back right after I graduated college a million years ago. I don't need to date myself, but it was a while ago. And I really focus on a couple different things. Conservation being my number one goal, and that being not so much what you're photographing, but what you're doing with the photographs afterwards. My photographs are always in pursuit of protecting either a place or a species, and involving people in that mission and how people can get involved in protecting the things that they love. That is selling fine art. I do a lot of fine art shows, anywhere from farmers market, street festivals, to big museum shows and exhibitions. I also lead photo tours all over the world. I actually just got back from Africa. I spent 3 weeks in Namibia, and I was really excited to do this trip because we've been postponing it since 2020. So to finally see that happening was just such a delight. And to see two of the guests that were with me had never been onto the continent of Africa, to see them actually experiencing the culture, the people, the amazing wildlife and landscapes that you see in Namibia. That was just such a treat. And then I also do work with conservation organizations. While I was in Namibia, I took time out to work with my absolute favorite nonprofit, which is the Cheetah Conservation Fund. And I was creating media assets for them. So actually going out into the field and the different aspects that they work in, out in farms and with local communities and school children, to educate different people in the community on why we need to protect the species cheetahs and keeping them alive in the wild. And then publications. So like a lot of photographers, I aim to get my work published in everything from online publications to print, magazines, newspapers, anything like that. And then I do a lot of advocacy work. So one of those organizations being the ethics committee chair for the North American Nature Photographers Association. So a lot of work with that. And then also another nonprofit that I work with is the Girls Who Click. And that is it's a nonprofit started by another wildlife photographer, Susie Esterhaus. I highly recommend you look her up if you aren't familiar with her work, but she started a nonprofit that focused on getting young girls, particularly teenagers, involved in pursuing a career in conservation photography. There's so few women in this industry that are professionals, so many that are amateurs, but once you hit that professional level, it goes down dramatically on the percent of women who are in this field. So I'm really passionate about encouraging young women to enter the field of conservation photography, and we do free workshops. I'm actually leaving for California next week to give a free workshop in La Jolla, and then I do mentoring. So one of my mentees was in India and of Mumbai, and then another one who's out of Colorado. So yeah, that's a little bit about me and some of my background and what I'm passionate about. But today we're going to talk about ethics, because that's really the topic that I am an expert in, and I want to share some best practices with you. So one of the things that I'm very proud of, not because I won, but because these messages are getting out. I won a conservation category award for the NANPA showcase that happens every year. And this image was the Judge's Choice Award winner for 2020. And it highlighted the impacts that we have on wildlife, particularly in places like national parks. So this is the conservation category Judge's Choice Award winning image. And it is actually part of a bigger project that I've been working on, involving human impact on wildlife behavior. But I did start my entire career when I was very young. I wanted to be a wildlife photographer because of this animal right here. I was so passionate about big cats, particularly cheetahs. And my whole big life goal was to go to Africa and photograph cheetahs. And I've been fortunate enough to be able to achieve that dream by, working with organizations, saving up, and traveling to Africa and photograph them in the wild, as well as in captive facilities that are working for rehabilitation. As a matter of fact, one of the things that I was able to do for the very first time recently was to photograph cheetahs that were set to be released, and they were doing a medical workup. So to see them on the table, and they were collecting DNA samples and just ensuring that these animals were ready for release, putting radio collars on them, and then seeing these animals going out into the wild. So a very special moment for me. But my journey as a ethics photographer really began with this animal. Totally different species, totally different part of the world. And this is a green sea turtle. Not a real interesting picture other than it's a green sea turtle sleeping on a beach in Hawaii. But I was actually on my honeymoon. Of course, when I was on my honeymoon, I turned it into a photo trip because I can't turn any vacation. I can't help but turn them all into photo trips. So thank God for my husband who puts up with me. But we were photographing this sea turtle, and I watched a man pass a sign that said, please do not disturb, resting sea turtles. He walked right past the sign, and he was smoking, and he got right up in the sea turtle's face and started smoking in the turtle's face. And I was so mad, and I was so upset that I turned away, and I just left. We left the beach and we left the scene. And I never forgot the fact that I still don't have a picture of what happened. All I have is that that memory of me being so angry. And I regretted not photographing that scene. So unfortunately for me, I had lots of other opportunities in my young career to photograph people behaving inappropriately. This gentleman here was taking a selfie with this sea lion pup who is clearly emaciated. He's pretty young. He was alone on the beach, isolated from others, which, as I've learned later into my career, this usually means he's either abandoned or he's sick. So I doubt the man who's taking the selfie knows that. He just saw an opportunity to see an animal that has been isolated away from the rest of the sea lions in the area, and he wanted to get his Instagram picture for his, profile or whatever he was doing. So I started to realize from that incident from the sea turtles that when I saw these things, I needed to take pictures of it, because without the documentation, we can't educate people why they shouldn't do this. We need to be able to show them, a picture that is going to move them and be able to say, this isn't right, and how can we be better? So not really trying to shame this individual. I don't know who he is, but I want to use these moments to make people rethink about their behavior when they're in the field, whether they're photographers, whether they're just taking a selfie, whatever that is. I want them to start thinking about what they're doing and what impacts they're having on animals after they leave them. So kind of taking a step back to, well, what is it mean to be an ethical photographer? So that is having an ethical approach when you're photographing any animals, having an idea of what kind of positive impacts you can have and how that might impact even just not just the wildlife, but you as a traveler. You know, if you are having positive experiences when you are out in the field, it's going to leave you feeling like you are doing good for the world, that you're having these wonderful moments that you can bring back with you instead of rethinking later, oh, was I doing something that was harmful to that animal or that place? So that's kind of what ethics mean. It's not necessarily black and white. It's the experience you're having and whether or not you think you're having a positive or a negative experience. It also really does mean, are you putting the welfare of your subjects before your photographs? So the first thing that I always talk about when I am talking about ethics is the importance of having knowledge about the subject that you're photographing. Before you are out in the middle of the field, you should have a basic knowledge of what it is you're photographing and how that animal is behaving. So an important thing is to understand is understanding that animal's life patterns. You know, are they needing to rest at a certain time? Are they nocturnal? Are they diurnal? Are they, nesting? You know, what's happening in their life cycle? And knowing that before you're in that situation is going to help you not interfere with that life cycle that they have. So I found this comic many years ago. Actually, somebody sent it to me, and I wish I could remember who. So many people send me great ethics things. But this comic really stuck to me. And it is, in a nutshell, about a photographer who's winning an award for this picture that he got. And he's bragging about how he spent the whole day playing recorded bird calls to get this bird to pose for him. Meanwhile, back at the nest, the female is sitting with her starving chicks, complaining that he's been gone all day and never brought food back because all he was doing was answering the calls to this person who was playing recorded bird calls instead of feeding his family. Another thing to understand is that you're not distressing wildlife or the habitats. You're understanding the routines of those animals. Something like that could be flushing birds. A lot of people who don't understand the importance of letting birds rest instead of making them fly is getting them to fly on purpose. So you get a bird in flight picture. You know, a picture of a bird on a stick is not as interesting as a bird who is flying, but forcing them to fly is going to use up a lot of unnecessary energy that they could be using to rest or eat or do the things that they need to do. A great way to avoid that is, excuse me, is to make sure that you have appropriate equipment with you, making sure that you have a longer lens if necessary, or that you are not encroaching on an area. Maybe if you can't get close enough, that you're putting the animal into a landscape picture as opposed to trying to get that close-up picture. Looking at an animal and understanding whether or not you're stressing them it's an important element to have as a photographer. Knowing the subject and what it looks like when they're stressed is a great way to know if you are, in fact, stressing that animal out. I like to say that every animal has an imaginary bubble, and we don't really know what that bubble is on that comfort zone until we've invaded it. If we do see that an animal is stressed, like this picture right here, this deer is clearly on alert. Its ears are forward, which means it's listening to you. Its tail is up. It's looking directly in the camera. There's no doubt in my mind that this animal is aware of my surroundings. Just because you've invaded the bubble does not mean that you're being unethical. It just means that you've now become aware of what you're doing and you need to take a step back, or even just wait and let the animal calm down. But knowing that you're doing that is 100% of the battle. It's about understanding what to look for and then reacting accordingly. You can see that these girls who are approaching these sea lions have clearly invaded what we'd call the baby sea lions bubble, right? It's aware, it's looking, it's definitely paying attention to these girls. You can see that this pup is definitely reacting. Now, this individual has gone a little bit overboard in my mind, but I love it. I saw this guy and I just thought he was everything that I would love to see in a photographer. He is camouflaged, his gear is camouflaged, he's using a long lens. He's taking a lot of care and effort to make sure he's not changing the subject's behavior. And I absolutely applaud this gentleman. So, not saying you have to go this far, you don't have to completely camouflage yourself, but to see that somebody is actually making an effort is completely 100% of the battle. So wildlife isn't the only thing that you can stress out in the field. Ecosystems can be fragile, and those two are something you need to be aware of. One of the best things to look for is just signs. Most places that are public access are going to warn you if there's a fragile habitat, and it's important to stay on the trails if you do see that. I love this sign because it also tells you there's rattlesnakes. So it's an extra little warning that says, don't get off of this trail. You don't know what you're going to run into. Other things to look for are signs that are indicating whether or not there's some restoration going on. And I absolutely love including this picture in the slides because you can see the deer is also paying attention to the signs here. There might not always be actual physical signs that tell you this area is a restoration area or off limits, but there might be indicators like these little flags. A flag typically means that they've planted something here and that they're trying to warn you not to step on it. So if you are wandering off trail a little bit, be aware of these little flags and make sure you're not trampling something somebody just planted. Something else to look for is closed areas. Obviously, if an area is closed to the public, there's a reason for it. In this particular case, there was a lot of bear activities going on this road, and they closed down the road to have public safety. Violating that and sneaking under areas that are closed to the public is not only dangerous for you, it's dangerous for the wildlife. And frankly, it just kind of ruins the fun for everybody when people are violating that. So just make sure if you absolutely need to get into an area that's closed, find somebody more official and see if you can get some private access. There might be somebody who can help you get to an area that you need to if it's closed to the public, but don't just go because you see a really cool bird or you really want to get close to that grizzly bear. Another thing to look for is whether or not you can bring pets onto trails and whether or not they need to be leashed. I would say majority of the time they need to be leashed, but bringing pets in areas that are off limits can be really dangerous for not just the wildlife, but also your pet. One example, I actually saw right after I saw this sign, there was a guy with his dog. And the reason I didn't get this picture because he had it inches away from a grizzly cub. And I don't always say anything, but if the animal is in absolute danger, I will always say something. And I told that guy he needed to leave because that grizzly bear was going after the dog. The dog was freaking out. It was a very scary situation. So there's really good reasons why you shouldn't bring your pet in areas that is restricted. Other signs I like to look for is areas that are indicating whether they're nesting or pupping or denning animals. And that is when you need to be extra careful. So this is an area that I photograph a lot in. It's in Southern California, and it's one of the only mainland rookeries for harbor seals and California sea lions in Southern California. This area is really sensitive because they do give birth right on the beach, and harbor seals in particular are a flea animal. If they are afraid that someone is after them, they will abandon their pup, and then the pup will be left there to die. So you can see here, even though there were signs indicating this, all these people walked right past those signs and just started photographing them anyways. So harbor seals, like many marine mammals, they do have to come out of the water to rest. They can't live in the water forever. So this is a situation where this mom is having to make a choice on whether or not she's going to tolerate these people or leave this pup. And at least, thank goodness, in this situation, the pup is still with her. But these people are far too close, and they are protected by the Marine Mammal Protection Act. So, in this particular case, everyone in this picture is actually breaking the law. This guy too, who just wanted a really close picture with a cell phone of this sleeping sea lion. Also, you need to be staying at least 25 yards away from marine mammals. So again, also violating. This particular picture is of a Hawaiian monk seal, and this is one of the most endangered seals in the world. And this guy is also getting extremely close, and you can see this seal is taking time out of resting to react to this individual. So if you're seeing that these animals are reacting to you, you're clearly too close. And talking about too close, physically handling is also not a good idea. So this brand new baby California sea lion here in La Jolla was running for his life while these girls are smiling, laughing. They're having a great time. You can't deny that these girls are having this moment that they think is great, but they are not reading the situation. They're not understanding what they're doing. And in this particular case, it can lead to pup abandonment. And people like these great people at SeaWorld Rescue will have to come in and rehabilitate these sea lion pups. And it happens quite often. So it's not always photographers. And I know I'm speaking to a group of photographers, but I love to tell this story because it's a situation that we don't always think of as an ethical situation. So it's not always about photographing, but just being aware of your surroundings. And in this case, these are Egyptian geese. This is a non-native species that these happen to live in California, even though they're an African bird. And they're an incredibly aggressive goose, especially when they're with your young. So in this particular case, this guy was just trying to walk on his trail. He was, listening to some music. I can see with the headphones in, and he was trying to walk and he saw these geese. This is the reaction they had as he got closer. And as a photographer and someone who is understanding wildlife, I could tell that they were very stressed and they were giving him every bit of warning that he needed to back up. To go around them on a different trail would have taken him out of his way. And I'm thinking he really wished he had done that, because that goose chased him down the street and bit him in the butt as the guy ran for his life. So it was a really good example of listening to the animals. They almost will always give you a warning, and trust them that they're telling you what's up. Okay, so we're going to switch into rules and regulations. So we talked about, understanding wildlife. Now, what are the rules? How do you find them? What are the rules that you need to be following? Just about every public location that you're going to be photographing in, whether they're national parks, state parks, anywhere like that, you're going to be given a set of guidelines, whether they're on websites or physical signs, brochures. And these are things that it's really important before you just wander off into a trail that you know what those rules are. Most of the rules tend to be pretty similar. A lot of them being, stay on the trails, do not feed wildlife, things like that. So just giving yourself a little bit of that knowledge beforehand is going to give you an idea of, what you should and shouldn't be doing in these public places. A lot of places have managers, whether they're park rangers or police officers that are monitoring, but they're few and far between a lot of the time. So understanding that you are a guest in these places and act as, as such. Try not to destroy the habitat as you're walking through it, and just have some personal responsibility. Something else that comes up more and more is the use of drones. And frankly, the rules are changing so rapidly that even in the ebook that I've been working on for 5 years, we've had to change what's in there so much that it's probably not even right, because it changes weekly as far as I'm concerned. But as far as drones go, there's a couple just regular guidelines that most often stay the same. That being that in national parks, they're prohibited. And anytime you're around nesting birds, it's also prohibited. So you're going to see in places that you're not going to be able to have drones, really clear signs. And when it does come to nesting birds, it's just a really, really dangerous idea. That goes for any animals that are reacting to that drone. If you're flying it too low, you're going to see a physical reaction, and it's usually running for their lives. A recent example that unfortunately happened, I think it was last year. Someone was illegally flying their drone in California. They accidentally crashed it on a beach full of endangered terns. Hundreds, if not thousands, of these birds just abandoned their nests, leaving all their eggs to sit there and fry in the sun. So it's really dangerous, and it's really important that you are doing your best not to fly your drones too close to nesting birds. Okay, so most people I talk to believe they're an ethical photographer, and I believe them. I think everybody who ever is listening to my presentation has already taken the steps to try to be a better person. So it's usually, what do I do when I see other people behaving inappropriately? And so I like to give some tips on that too. So I like to assume the best in people. Maybe I'm an optimist, but I like to assume that nobody is purposely trying to harm wildlife until they've told me otherwise. So when I do see people behaving inappropriately, the first thing I do is give them a benefit of the doubt and try to tactfully inform them how they can be better. I never argue. And I say that I never argue because I try not to argue anymore. That is a method that I did in my younger years that I will tell you 99% of the time does not work. Nobody likes to be told what to do. And the first thing they're going to do is fight you back. So telling people that they're doing something bad doesn't always sit well. So try to educate, approach them in a way that you're letting them know, hey, maybe we're doing something that is being harmful and we could do this instead. But if they're not reacting to you positively, let it go unless it's an urgent situation and step back and document. I also highly recommend finding the proper authorities of that location and then reporting them. And that's where the documentation comes in beautifully. Because if you just say to a park ranger, hey, I saw this guy feeding a grizzly bear, he'll say, where was it? Who was it? You know, did you get a license plate number? If you can photograph those things, now you have a case to move on. So think about that, not just necessarily the act, but the license plate number or any other indicating factor that they could find that individual. A terrible example, unfortunately, I recently, it was actually last year, I photographed a truck driver who pulled off the side of a highway where there was a mom grizzly and two cubs, and he was throwing pies. I mean, store-bought pies. I couldn't even understand what was happening in the moment. I was so dumbfounded that a truck driver would have gone to the grocery store, bought pies for this bear. I mean, I don't know if he thought he was Yogi the bear or what, but he was throwing pies. And a lot of photographers were photographing the bears, so they got into a big old fight. And the first thing we did is we started photographing the truck because it says, you know, how am I doing? Call this number. And that's what we did. We let his boss know, you know, this guy is throwing pies to a bear. And the reason that's so dangerous is once park rangers or any sort of authority realizes the bear is now been food conditioned, that's a death sentence for that bear. So luckily the bear did not go after the pies, and one of the photographers ran up the hill and got the pies, which bless their heart, that was more brave than I was going to do. So the bear did not actually go for the food reward. But the point being is making sure that you are getting the right documentation and reporting that behavior. Something else that can be, you don't always think of is seasonal and regional type of behavior. So if you're in Texas, the concept of animals licking vehicles for salt is maybe not something that happens a lot. But if you are traveling to an area like Wyoming or Colorado where they do get a lot of snow, these are things that you need to think about. So there was a sign, we just saw it, it said, do not allow animals licking vehicles. And this photographer is clearly being oblivious to the fact that this is exactly what's happening. The reason why this is such bad behavior is it causes disease transmission. So we want to avoid these situations happening. And as a photographer, having these great horn sheep, yeah, coming to the vehicles, oh, that's, really convenient that they're approaching me, but we need to make sure that we're discouraging that type of behavior. So if you are seeing that, instead of ignoring it, haze them a little way, or physically leave if you're seeing them approaching your vehicle. So I love to photograph bears. I do it a lot. I go to Wyoming a couple times a year to do so. And so again, this may or may not apply depending on where you live, but it's a topic that I think is really important. If you are photographing an area where you do have bears, there's certain things as an ethical photographer that you should have in mind. That being that you are carrying bear spray. That is a really essential tool if you're going to be anywhere where there's bears, because you don't want to have an encounter with a bear that's going to be negative. And that means you're also knowing what to do when you do encounter a bear. You're not running, you're making a lot of noise, things like that. The most dangerous thing I see, though, is not people approaching bears, is what we call bear jams. And that's where a lot of photographers are lining up on the side of the road to see bears. And this is really dangerous because people get hit by cars and they block the roadway. And so if you are trying to be in an area where you're seeing bears, that you are behaving in a manner that is going to be safe for you and everyone around you. That means you're pulling off completely to the side of the road. And that means you're also not standing in the road. And if the bear is crossing, you're not just darting into traffic. So those are all things to think about, that also is putting you and the bear and everyone else in a safe situation. We talked about this picture at the beginning, but I'm bringing it up again because when a lot of photographers, whether they're bears or moose or any other animal that you're photographing, you want to make sure you're not blocking them from doing what they need to do. Bears like to cross the road. A lot of animals like to cross the road. So you want to make sure you're not blocking them from doing so. And thank goodness for these great guys here and gals in the yellow vests. We call them the Bear Brigade, and they're not there for the bear. They're there for all the bear watchers. So if you don't have somebody who's monitoring, make sure that you're also not blocking an animal from doing what they need to do, like crossing a road, crossing a stream, whatever they're trying to do. Okay, so I love this this poster. I got it off of one of the national park websites, and it's talking about sometimes the best relationships are long distance relationships. So it's really talking about how close is too close. So almost all public areas have an actual legal limit to what is you're allowed to be getting close to wildlife. For dangerous animals like bears, wolves, mountain lions, it's usually 100 yards. And for just about everything else, it's about 25 yards. So bearing in mind that animals like squirrels and things like that probably don't fall in that category, but your moose, your elk, your bison, things like that. So 25 yards is a good starting point. Also watch out for behavior. I mean, I've seen photographers standing right at that 25-yard line, but they have a moose who is in rut, and he turned around and chased all those photographers. So know your subjects, watch them still. Just because you're within the legal limit doesn't mean you're necessarily not too close. And then if you are photographing from the road, I do that a lot. I love to be able to use my car as a blind or a convenient place to find wildlife. But if you are seeing wildlife, don't just stop in the middle of the highway. I've seen people do that in national parks. They get out and their car is sitting in the highway. Make sure you are pulling off the side of the road. You're putting all the tires off the road, and that you're not causing any encounters with other cars. Sometimes the wildlife is right on the road too. So in this case, make sure you're not causing them to move, just sit and wait. In some cases, that can be a long time. I've been in Yellowstone and had bison decide that they're going to just stand on the road for hours, and everybody just sits and waits. So that can be inconvenient, especially if you have somewhere to be, but it's safer to just let them cross the way that they want to cross when they want to cross. You kind of force them, they'll start to scatter and it becomes more dangerous. If you do see them standing on the road, again, just let them be, let them cross when they're ready. This also goes for marine animals. I don't think this gets talked enough, enough about, is that there are legal limits to marine animals too. So whales and dolphins, that if you're in a boat, that you're not approaching them too closely as well. So 100 yards are typically for whales, 50 for other animals like dolphins, seals, sea lions when you're out in the water. A couple other things to think about is not getting between marine animals. So you're not getting in between moms and calves, or you're not separating pods of whales or dolphins. And obviously things like tagging, marking, anything else, that you're not doing that. For my friends in Canada, because there was somebody on here, I did get this from one of the Canadian sites. Different whales also have different regulations. So if you are out on a boat, understanding the different whales and what those regulations are is also important. So it's all about doing your research. For things like sea otters, I do work with an organization out of Northern California called Sea Otter Savvy, and their mission is to get people to not be harassing sea otters, particularly when they're on kayaks. So if you do encounter a sea otter, that you are understanding the difference between them resting and being alert, and knowing again what that imaginary bubble is that you are approaching too closely. Sea otters particularly need a lot of time to eat and rest. I mean, that is kind of their whole life: eat, rest, groom. So if you are spending too much time getting close, they're not doing the things they need to do just to survive. And we talked a little bit about this too. It's seals and sea lions, but same thing. They need to come out of the water and rest. And if they're alert, they're not doing what they need to do, which is resting. And then the next topic is something that's really near and dear to my heart. I've seen way too many tragedies and heard too many tragedies, but it's the importance of not feeding wildlife. There's probably a lot of reasons why people feel the need to feed wildlife. It's maybe a maternal urge to take care of something that looks hungry, but it's only doing harm to wildlife. So a lot of areas like national parks, it's actually illegal and you can get a ticket for doing so. But more importantly, it's just really, really dangerous for the animals and for people too. So this is one example of an animal that has clearly been habituated. This girl is actually a park ranger, and she just looks disgusted over the fact that he's approaching her. He keeps trying to steal garbage as she's picking it up. And I watched this red fox for a while. This was out of Colorado. And every time a car approached, he ran straight to the car and sat down. So he was clearly food habituated. People had been feeding him out of his cars, and it broke my heart to see him chasing cars because it was inevitable about what was going to happen. Luckily, I didn't see what was inevitable, but I've seen far too many roadkill accidents to know that when animals associate cars with food, it's really just a death sentence. This goes for animals that are approaching boats too. When they're food habituated, they get hit by the motors and they end up getting killed. Owl baiting is another topic that comes to mind when we talk about feeding animals. There's a practice I'm hoping is going to become extinct soon because it is just a horrible thing that happens. But there are photographers, workshop leaders that will take store-bought mice and throw them to owls in order to get pictures of owls in flight. This is incredibly dangerous for the owls. They typically do this near the side of the road, so it's drawing them into roads. This isn't their food source, and frankly, it's really inhumane to the store-bought mouse. So, try to get your owls in a natural setting, like this one I photographed in Point Reyes. You don't need to throw them food in order to get pictures of owls doing dynamic, beautiful flight moves. And also, most photo contests now will not allow those images into the contests, just as a side note. Now, bird feeders. Now, I know a lot of people are thinking, wait a minute, I do feed birds. So am I being unethical? And that is a personal choice. And on a complete personal note, I have a bird feeder. I feed birds. I don't do it for photography, but I just do have a bird feeder. And I don't think that's unethical. There's a big leap between putting out bird seed and feeding an owl. And I don't have enough time in this presentation to go into the details, but I can certainly talk to anyone who's interested. But where I think the ethics come into feeding birds is just making sure that you are doing it in a manner that is not harming those birds. So keeping them clean, keeping them away from windows, and most importantly, if you are seeing predators starting to use your bird feeder as a baiting station, take it down for a little while until that predator is moved on. So you don't want to see like hawks or foxes or other animals using that bird feeder as a way for them to catch food either. So otherwise, as far as I'm concerned, I think bird feeders are fine, but I'm just one opinion, and that's all these are. They're just opinions. But I do believe that interacting with wildlife only when they want to interact with you means you're going to get better photographs. The animals are going to look more natural and they're going to look more relaxed. A great way to do this, good tip, is to use photography blinds. And there's lots of different blinds out there. Some are in these wood structures that are permanent. They're out there in different areas where there's a lot of good bird activity. I use my car a lot as photo blinds. So this is a safari vehicle, but you can just use your sunroof or just, roll down your window and photograph out the side of it. It's a great way to camouflage yourself from animals, and they tend to be far more relaxed when they don't really notice that you're there. Something else that you should really be aware of, though, is that at any point you need to be aware of your surroundings. If you're walking, if you are out in nature, know that wildlife can be unpredictable. So you do need to be very aware of your surroundings. That also means that you're looking behind you as well as what's in front of you. Or you might end up like these people who were actually out looking for this moose and had the moose following them back to their car. They're clearly oblivious he was standing there. Another few tips for you is to get into the mindset of the animal. Think about, how do they view you? Are you a predator to them, or are you prey to them? And they're going to react to you depending on that notion alone. Something that can help you is to blend into the surroundings. Wear dark fabrics or clothes that don't make a lot of noise when you're walking is going to help you be a little less invasive in their space. Getting low can often help, especially for animals that see you as a predator. If you can sit and be low, that helps. That's not a good recommendation for animals that see you as prey. So again, know what your animal is and how to react accordingly. And then avoid walking directly at wildlife. If you can walk at an angle and avoid eye contact, a lot of times they're more likely to let you get closer because they're trying to avoid you seeing them. And if they think you don't see them, they're going to stay still. And be quiet. I hear so many people out and they're talking or playing music, and that's only scaring the wildlife away. So try to be quiet, and that's going to help you get closer to wildlife. And then never, ever block an animal's escape route. So if you see an animal, the first thing you should be looking for is, where are they going to go if they want to leave, and giving them that out so that they can have the opportunity to leave. Now, if an animal does become aggressive when you see them, let them leave, or you leave. It's never a good idea to chase an animal. It's only going to put them into danger or you. So respect their right to decline the photo session, just like you wouldn't want a stranger just coming into your house and taking pictures of you while you're, sitting having dinner. That's how they feel too. If they want to leave, let them leave. It's just not worth it to have them become aggressive. Okay, so lastly, we're going to talk just a little bit about captive animals. So when it comes to captive animals, there's a lot of reasons why you might do this. They might be at a rehab facility. They might just be at the zoo. You want to see animals that you don't want to travel all over the world to see, there's a lot of great opportunities for photographing captive animals. Is just as matter of doing it in an ethical manner, just like anything else. So one of the things that I look for when photographing captive animals is looking for facilities that are accredited. AZA accreditation, which is the Association of Zoos and Aquariums, that's out of the United States. There's different accreditations for if you're in other countries, but looking for organizations that have an accreditation is a really good starting point. These accreditations are looking for animal welfare, whether or not the animals are cared for, is there a conservation or education purpose, how are they treating the staff? All of those things are vital to making sure you're picking a facility that's actually taking care of the animals appropriately. A couple things to ask yourself before going into a facility, and and not everything is accredited with the AZA. For example, some rehab facilities, they just don't meet the specific accreditation for AZA, but doesn't mean they're not ethical. So you can ask yourself questions like, does the facility serve a conservation or education purpose? Does the facility offer a human animal contact, and is it done in a manner that's both safe for the animal and person? So the first thing that comes to my mind is the movie or the documentary Tiger King, right? Cub petting for tigers is not done in a way that is in anyone's best interest. Ask yourselves, where do these animals come from? So were they born at the facility? And if they were they done according to the genetic diversity guidelines? So avoiding inbreeding and things like that. Were these animals captured from the wild? And were they brought from other facilities? So maybe they came from a different facility. And then for me, really important, what happens to the animal as once there's no longer a good use for them. So there are facilities that are set up for photographers to come and photograph. They want beautiful animals that appear like they're in the wild. And once those animals are no longer beautiful, they discard them. And to me, that's not an ethical way to treat wildlife. So whether you're photographing in captive facilities or like this one I got just on my recent trip in Namibia, just have the animal's best interest in mind and, have fun and interact and care for the subjects that you're photographing. To me, the best pictures come when an animal feels comfortable enough to go about its daily life as if you're no longer there. It takes time to build up those relationships, but trust me, the end results are well worth the wait. This is one of my favorite pictures that I've ever taken. It took a long time to sit and get the sea lions to be relaxed. I'm using a long lens. And this moment is definitely one where you can tell that they're reacting to each other in a very loving, natural way. So before I go into any questions, I just want to invite anyone to join me in the field. I do, like I said, run workshops. I have many on the docket, including my next one, which is in Grand Teton National Park. It's in the fall. And then I have tons all over. So I invite you to join me, and I think we'll have a lot of fun. So you can find all those tours on my website at experiencewildlife.com. And I believe Linda has a link in the notes on how to get to there. But this is my contact information. So my website, my email, and my social contacts as well. And if you have any questions about anything we talked about or just want to chat, feel free to reach out. And I love having these conversations with people. So I am going to stop sharing and open it up for questions.
Well, perfect. So I was monitoring the chat. There's one question there, and you actually addressed it. It was Jamie wasn't as eloquent as her question was like, how do you address, how do you tell people, hey, you shouldn't be doing that without sounding like a Karen? But you answered it perfectly. Actually, you actually got there in the next slide. So it was really perfect timing. But, that's a very valid question because you're out there, and I don't know all the rules. I'm learning, and I'm actually very new to wildlife. It's something that, I'm it's more of an obsession at the moment. I'm going to get to that point where I'm like, okay, this is just where I want. I mean, it's so much fun, but it is, when am I going out next? But I'm slowly learning and understanding, and um, having that opportunity to just observe animals. The more you know about their behaviors, the more um, comfortable I've become. And then I've noticed the progression of how much nicer and cleaner and just prettier my pictures are, because those animals, there's a lot of distance because I'm mostly afraid of animals. So I'm always got a lot of distance between me and them. So I don't, let me see, let me glance through really quick. I didn't see a lot of questions, but a lot of other ladies in the room also turn their honeymoons into photo trips, photo opportunities. So I think Christy got a little look from her husband going, you do that too. There is one question from Susan. She wants to know, how did you tell the people who were too close to the grizzlies to back away?
Yeah. So the situation with the dog, I assume, is what you're talking about. Yeah. So when it comes to someone behaving inappropriately, I'm going to kind of take a step back and then answer that question. So there's a few questions that are just going through my mind really quickly. And that is, and the number one question is the animal, the person, or the people around them in immediate danger? And if the answer to any of those questions is yes, I step in. If the answer is no, the first thing I do is take pictures, because if you do encounter them and it's negative, you turning around and taking pictures, it's not going to go over well. But if it is an immediate situation like the grizzly and the dogs, I do step in right away. And in that case, it was a terrifying situation. It was a grizzly cub. It was two little dogs, and the guy's taking pictures while holding the dog on the leash, and the dogs were trembling, and you could see the bear was really interested. And I went right up to the guy, and I just kind of gently grabbed his arm, and I said, oh, I didn't know if you knew this, but dogs are not allowed on this trail, and as you can see, your dogs are terrified. It's really dangerous. I need you to take them away. And the guy was just like, whatever. And luckily I was with somebody else, and they reiterated, you need to leave right now with those dogs. It's really, really dangerous for them. And he just kind of huffed and walked away. So luckily, nothing happened other than him leaving, but I try not to interfere in that extreme of a manner unless it is immediate danger. And in that case, I felt absolutely those dogs were at risk of being eaten by a bear, not to mention the guy holding them. So, yeah.
I'll say it. Okay, you guys know what I'm thinking. But okay, thank you for going through that, because it's this whole presentation, it's so comprehensive. There was so much good information, especially for anybody that is new to wildlife photography. And I'm one of those people. So some of that stuff I knew, some of that stuff is common sense, but this whole program, start to finish, it's an educational session. And I so appreciate you taking the time from your schedule, because I know you've got to be a little tired from your trips. So I really do appreciate you letting me put this as part of the Happiness Hour collection, because somebody's going to stumble across it and go, I wonder what this is about. And it's just a beautiful, comprehensive, session. So thank you for coming and doing this for our group. Let me go ahead and close out the session. You guys, you can connect with Jennifer through her website, experiencewildlife.com, and on Instagram, you can find her at experiencewildlife. Next week, Brian Scanlon will join us from California, and he'll share some of his tips on storytelling in his presentation, I Want to Know Your Name, Classic Storytelling Techniques to Transform Your Art. And this is kind of like a little bit of a what's the word I'm looking for? Little scoop. I saw Brian do his presentation at an out of Chicago event recently. They gave him 7 minutes, and but when his 7 minutes were up to do his presentation, I was like, I'm not done with him. So I invited him to come and talk to this group, and he jumped at it. So I'm super excited to squeeze him in, because we were not going to meet next week. It's actually my birthday, and I was going to take the evening off, but I really wanted to get him on. So until next time, next Wednesday, go out and create something beautiful, and I hope that we see you again soon.